Hello everyone, my name is Cody Buntain. I'm an assistant professor of informatics at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our paper, YouTube Recommendations and Effects on Sharing Across Online Social Platforms. This is work I've done with some colleagues at the Center for Social Media and Politics at NYU. In early 2019, YouTube made an announcement on their blog about how they would try and address issues of misinformation and potentially harmful content on their platform. Rather than deleting content from their platform, they would reduce recommendations to content that was potentially misinforming or harmful to users, which provided us an important question about whether this sort of derecommendation strategy for content moderation really might have any impact outside of YouTube, given YouTube's popularity across the information environment. And you might ask this question because if you're already embedded in a sort of alternative information space, or as Cass Sunstein talks about in his book, you already have a form of corrupted epistemology where you're not trusting mainstream information, you are already engaged with these potentially harmful or misinforming kinds of ideas, and a new video is posted to YouTube, and YouTube recommends you that content, say a video about deep state and political control. What is the impact on that compared to if a friend of yours who's also in this environment with you says, hey, check out this new video about deep state and political control, and then provides you a link back to that video? So if YouTube were to remove this recommendation from your auto playlist or reduce your likelihood of seeing a recommendation to this video, what kind of impact might that have when your friends on some other platform, Facebook or Reddit or 4chan or WhatsApp, etc., is sharing links to these kinds of videos with you? This is an important question because in some cases we know that deletion as a content moderation strategy is effective, as talked about in this 2017 paper by Eshwar Chandrasekaran and colleagues, where they looked at Reddit's ban of particular kinds of hateful communities on their platform. From the YouTube scenario, if somebody shares a link to a particular YouTube video and it's been deleted and you're given an error page, well, it doesn't really matter if that link gets shared 5 times or somebody stumbles across it 7 days after the video has been deleted. That content is now no longer accessible to them on the YouTube platform. Whereas with derecommendation, that video may still remain, and people can still be exposed to this through this social network passing that we know has some significant effect. On the other hand, derecommendation may provide an important or useful strategy for reducing incidental exposure to potentially problematic content, where we cannot perhaps, through derecommendation, help those people who are already engaged in an alternative information environment. We can help those people who are stumbling across potentially problematic content by removing the opportunities to be incidentally exposed to that content. So that brings us to the point of this talk, where we show that changes to recommendation systems in YouTube do appear to suppress antisocial content in multiple platforms, but may inadvertently amplify borderline content. We'll talk about that at the end. So the motivating question here is whether YouTube's derecommendation strategy, crucially without deletion, impacts sharing of such videos across the information ecosystem. To answer this question, we measure the differences in the daily frequency of derecommended video sharing before and after YouTube's announcement, specifically looking at how these videos were shared on Twitter and Reddit, so we get insight into the engagement with these videos off of YouTube's platform. The time frame for our analysis here is the 8 months around YouTube's announcement. We have daily data from Twitter and from Reddit, where we get insight into content shared on the platform, content that includes links to YouTube videos, and content that includes links to YouTube videos of a particular kind that we think could be targets for this derecommendation treatment. And we use this red line to denote when YouTube made this announcement, so we can divide these regimes up into a pre-announcement and post-announcement, or pre-treatment and post-treatment regime. Our model here is the interrupted time series model that lets us be more sophisticated and capture the time series attributes, such as autocorrelation. Specifically, we have a 4-factor model to predict the amount of sharing of a particular kind of treated video on a particular platform per day. Broken down into these 4 factors, looking at the number of videos shared on the platform on a given day, the number of targeted videos, so these are videos that are subject to derecommendation, shared on that platform in the day prior, letting us capture the autocorrelation effect in the time series, and then the 2 factors that we care about, beta 3 and beta 4, let us track our treatment. Beta 3 here is whether a given day is before or after YouTube's announcement, and beta 4 tells us the number of days that have passed since YouTube's announcement. So this beta 3 factor lets us say, is there a significant change in level of sharing? And then beta 4 is there a change in trend? The further you get from YouTube's announcement, we would expect a significant or more compounding effect of this announcement. So you'd see a more suppressive effect the further you go from the announcement. So the next thing we want to deal with, though, is how do we identify derecommended videos? This is problematic because we don't necessarily know what derecommended videos are. Fortunately, though, we have some side channel information here. So back in 2019, Nicholas Suzerk had this really great investigation looking at videos from Rebecca Lewis's Alternative Influence report, and he had some preliminary evidence saying that YouTube stops recommendations to alt-right channels. So that gave us one kind of potential video for derecommendation. And then a lot of the media coverage of YouTube's change was that YouTube was targeting conspiracy videos. So we look at conspiracy videos as well. So with those in mind, we using Rebecca Lewis's report on alternative influence, we identified 69 AIN channels with 41,000 or so videos. For conspiracy content, we rely on this great paper from Marc Fadul, Guillaume Cheslow, and Hani Farid, where they have a classification mechanism to identify YouTube videos as being conspiracy or not in the platform. This gives us about 6,800 videos labeled as conspiracy from about 1,800 YouTube channels. For comparison, we rely on mainstream media content. So we would expect mainstream media content to not be subjected to the same sort of derecommendation strategies that we would see. So to do this, we have gathered about 800,000 videos from 65 mainstream media channels from a number of political sites, looking at CNN content, Fox News content, MSNBC, these kinds of channels. So now we can actually answer this question about YouTube's derecommendation without deletion across platforms. First, looking at AIN videos, we see across Twitter and Reddit, and these 4 factors we're looking at, the 2 factors that we care about most here are treatment and distance from treatment. We see in both platforms a consistent result of a significant and negative or suppressive effect for AIN videos. That is, the more days you have since YouTube's announcement, the fewer AIN videos you'll expect to see. For conspiracy videos, we see a similar result in that in both Twitter and Reddit, again, we see a significant and suppressive effect. The more days that have passed since YouTube's announcement, the fewer conspiracy videos you see, and no significant change in treatment. For mainstream media, we see a different result, also in line with our expectations, that the further you get away from YouTube's announcement, the more mainstream media shares you see on both Twitter and Reddit. For links to conspiracy channels, however, we see a different result. We no longer have the significant suppressive effect we saw for Twitter and Reddit before. Instead, we see only a positive and significant effect on Reddit. That is, the moment after YouTube's announcement, we see a significant increase in the links to conspiracy channels on the Reddit platform, even though this result is not consistent in Twitter. Now, one possible explanation for this is that the content creators are responding to this kind of change or this kind of announcement by creating different kinds of content or conspiracy-adjacent content. Or, more worryingly, is this is actually part of the technological affordances of derecommendation, that by creating a new line or a new policy line, that content that no longer is being recommended, those recommendations are now going to borderline content or content that is conspiracy adjacent. And this is a phenomenon that Facebook has discussed in their blueprint for content governance and enforcement. Separate from this amplification of conspiracy content, the New York Times also had an article about how YouTube's efforts to cut down misinformation may have inadvertently boosted Fox News. This is actually totally consistent with the results that we have, where we see for mainstream media an increase in mainstream media sharing the further you get away from YouTube's announcement on both Twitter and Reddit, and it's certainly plausible that Fox News gets more results or more recommendations or more views as a result of this effect, where potentially extremely conservative content no longer gets the same kind of recommendations that they were getting before. Now those recommendations now go to more mainstream conservative sources. So this brings us to the major takeaways for the work. The first is that derecommendation does appear to decrease sharing of these targeted videos across the information ecosystem, or at least on 2 mainstream and popular platforms, Twitter and Reddit. But it's not without potentially negative consequences, such as this increase in sharing of conspiracy-oriented or conspiracy-adjacent channels that we see on Reddit. And it may also inadvertently boost conservative media sources, which is a societal issue that we need to come to terms with or determine if this is a reasonable kind of outcome that we want our decision-making or decision support systems to provide. Ultimately, though, it's difficult to answer these questions without additional insight from YouTube, such as how these recommendations are being suppressed. Are they suppressed uniformly across the different kinds of videos? Are they viewed in the same way that they're shared? Because a lot of what we do here is based on engagement and sharing, but we don't have very much insight into views. So I want to end this talk with a call to YouTube to give us more insight, to give researchers more insight about how these recommendation strategies are impacting our content consumption. And with that, I'll end the talk by thanking you for taking the time to listen. Happy to answer questions during the conference Q&A session, and I encourage you to check out the paper for a lot more discussion about threats to validity and a number of other important issues that we need to deal with to help us understand the impact of these decision support systems.